Hey, this is Stu for Love Yoga Anatomy, and I'm here with Adarsh Williams. And he is like me, he's a body worker and also a yoga teacher and anatomy teacher. So the whole three-hat thing. So we've got the opportunity to talk a little bit sort of anatomy geeky, and that's what the focus I think will be of this interview. Because it's not always the case that yoga teachers have a big depth of anatomy in the way that they approach their teaching. So what do you draw from when you're trying to teach that can provide students the opportunity to be a little bit safer in what they do, to access the body a little bit more easily? What are the sort of fundamentals that you draw upon?
Yeah, thank you, Stu. I think that a lot of us coming into yoga will have an urge to do yoga, but we don't necessarily have a strong movement background or body background.
Right.
And as someone who went to massage school and I had that whole training, I came into yoga really looking at those things, really looking at structure, looking at how people were moving. And the truth is that I would look around the yoga room and I would often cringe at things that I would see people doing. Yeah, you would see people in clearly bad positions. You didn't have to be an expert to recognize it. And really struggling, right? So it didn't look like a very yogic experience. Those are things that were very poignant to me. And I lived over in Mysore for a few years, so I really got to see a lot of elite level yoga practitioners up close. And I saw they struggle with the same problems that my students back home struggle with, which is they were getting injured, or they were coming in with injuries, or their bodies were just not quite ready for the intensity that they were putting themselves through. So I really thought about how to apply best my trade of body work within the yoga room. And I did treat people, I did plenty of hands-on treatments, especially back in the early days. But at some point I started asking if the person could treat themselves. Instead of coming back next week for the same shoulder massage, take this ball and put it there and rub against the wall and see how that feels. So I think the realization for me is that a lot of the basic information that I learned in massage school with how to self-treat some of these things were not known in the general yoga public. So for me, I really became interested in teaching this DIY approach to self-treatment to my yoga friends. We would always joke in Mysore, oh, the yoga makes me so sore. My sore shoulder, my sore back, right? Which is kind of a funny thing. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I would never tell people that they should stretch out or do anything like that before their yoga practice. I don't think that's necessary. But I think a little bit of evening time maintenance, a little down regulation practice, a little foam rolling while you're watching TV or checking your social media before bed. And the science is pretty clear on this. We know that people are going to sleep better and they're going to recover better. And they'll be ready for practice the next morning, which is really the goal anyway. So I try to help students to train more like athletes. I really see that our sport is yoga, right? So just like a basketball player would do strength training or some type of self-recovery treatment, we want to do the same thing for our sport of yoga.
So a little bit of supplementation with more knowledge about stabilization and movement? Is that sort of thing you're thinking about?
Absolutely. So stabilization is really related to the movement itself. So when someone comes in for a yoga class, they usually have an idea about, I need to relax, I'm going to do some stretching. And I actually don't even use stretching in my yoga class. I don't think that yoga has any stretching. I think that we're trying to normalize some of the muscle lengths. I think that we're doing some things to break up adhesed fascia patterns and scar tissues and things like that. But I would never say that we're actually doing stretching. I would say that looking at Patanjali's famous sutra around stability and ease makes the position. So stability is first, and we're always prioritizing stability. The system that I teach is always about spine stability first. So usually we give general cues about keep your back straight. And if someone's not sure what that means, we try to create a way for them to feel it. And it's not about alignment. It's not about aligning your body in a position. It's about engaging the right tissues, understanding what that feeling is when you're stable, and then knowing what the feeling is when you're not stable. So you can quickly make that decision for yourself within the yoga posture.
And we were talking off camera a little bit, and you were saying to me you don't really like the word alignment. And so what sort of words would you prefer to use? And just explain maybe why alignment can be a bit of a dodgy word to use.
Yeah. Well, I think like a lot of things in yoga, it was a good idea that kind of went bad, right? I like to joke about good cues gone bad.
Right.
We hear good cues all the time, like straight legs. It's a good cue, it's actually accurate, but it goes bad because the student doesn't know how to apply that clearly, or maybe the teacher doesn't know how to apply that clearly. Alignment really has a lot of baggage like that. We have this idea of aligning and kind of stacking, almost like stacking blocks of wood or something.
Yeah.
And for the practice that we do, these dynamic vinyasa practices, alignment, these stacks of alignment moving from position to position doesn't really work. So we want to look at movement and we want to look at position. So for me, alignment is a lot more about stability. And I see that clearly. For example, if I were to have someone stretch their arm across their body, the shoulder almost automatically lifts up as they go across. But if I add a little bit of resistance and I say, hey, push your arm back into your hand, that shoulder immediately drops down. I didn't have to talk about alignment. I didn't have to figure out 45 different points of alignment for the shoulder. All I had to do is give one cue, resist, which is really like a code language for stability. Hey, I want you to stabilize your arm by pushing back now. As a yoga teacher, we have to figure out ways to communicate this stuff really quickly with as few words as possible, which is not easy.
Because otherwise it just like becomes a washing over of information, doesn't it? It's just like people switch off.
We seem to exist in a world between TMI, too much information, and TLI, too little. Right? And I don't think the beginning student needs a lot of information. They certainly don't need 50 points of alignment for a particular pose. They usually need one good cue, and I think first principles thinking is really helpful for that. So what we'll always talk about with our teacher trainees is, hey, you want to prioritize that spine position. Look at the head. If you see someone in a plank position and their head is up or down, then you clearly know that they have a fault. And we know that they're going to be weaker anytime that head deviates from a neutral position. We know this. We know the person's going to be weaker. So this gives us a little template as teachers to follow. And then certainly for the student, I'm always thinking, hey, I got to breathe. I've got to create some kind of stability. And I do that through muscular engagement.
And so when you're thinking about things that you commonly see, like we mentioned at the beginning, you walk into the Mysore room and it's like, okay, this is sort of going on. What are the some of the common things that you see that people can like check this on themselves? So when they're watching this, hopefully they think, okay, when I go next time, I'll just focus in, and am I doing this, and that sort of thing. So what sort of things do you pick up on as you look around?
One of the main things is that someone's posture is their posture. If you walk into the yoga room and your back is overextended and your shoulders are rounded forward, and we know that most people are like this. We know that most people have that lower cross syndrome, that their pelvis is anteriorly tilted. We know most people have the upper cross syndrome where their shoulders are rounded forward. So whatever position you walk into the yoga room is, that's going to be your position during. If your shoulders are rounded forward, all of your chaturangas are going to look like that. So I would say the first thing before you even saddle up on your mat is to start looking at your position and start looking at your positional faults day to day. If you're cruising around on your phone and your head is down like that, right? I mean, we used to call this in massage, we used to call this forward head. It's not even that anymore. Now it's text neck, right?
And it's even worse because it's like this sometimes. The chin is actually resting on the sternum with the thing here.
It's a killer. So, and I'm the worst because my kids, right, they're little, but they'll want to look at their phone. And immediately, as soon as that head drops down, I'm like taking the phone away from them. And it's not because I want to be hard on them, and it's not because I want them to have like this little prissy posture. It's because I know that those things are going to make a big difference down the road when they're 20 or 40 years old and they've got this major kyphotic situation going on their neck, they've lost their cervical curve. These are things I'm worried about. In yoga, we have a great template for correcting all of these things. We have a very formal training ground for that. So a posture like Tadasana or Samastiti becomes, okay, now I'm correcting my posture. Now I'm fixing this. So in Samastiti, I would always use that as my quick kind of snapshot of someone's posture, right? I can look at that and think, hey, that person's neutral, that person's tilted in this or that direction, and I can start to make assessments from there or even corrections from there. So I would always encourage people to make sure that they develop a relationship with those neutral positions. In our videos earlier, we filmed that two-hand rule. So that becomes a really great reference point for me to check my alignment. I don't have to look in a mirror. I don't have to have an external set of eyes. I can just feel and check that on myself. And the good thing is that it becomes more of a habit that I can check. I can quickly feel these things. Then when I'm doing a plank or a position that's very challenging, I know what it feels like. I have that reference point. So I think that alignment, and look, teachers are trying to solve these problems, words like alignment, and alignment does matter. Katie Bowman wrote that great book, Alignment Matters. I completely agree. You know, we know this from Wolff's Law. The way that your body is going to grow and shape is based on your position. If it's in a crappy position, it's going to grow and shape that way. If it's in a good position, it's going to grow more robust and strong. So alignment does matter, but we have to be careful about our languaging with it. It doesn't mean propping ourselves up in these unattainable positions. So we end up with a lot of posing. And back when I was a teenage anarchist and riding my skateboard around, if someone was a poser, it was not something we were cool with at all. It was like the worst insult ever. That guy's a poser. But we see people in the yoga room, they end up just kind of posing. And we see a lot of challenges. People who are interested in yoga are often kind of flexible, right? They're kind of stretchy. That's why they like yoga.
Like it, they're good at it, and they're good at it. Now I found something.
I found something. So I go in as the hypermobile student, and my teacher is immediately giving me positive feedback because, wow, you can do it all. You can reach down and hold your toe, and you can do these poses. So as a student, I'm getting a lot of high fives and accolades. Other students are even telling me, you look so beautiful in your asanas. But the problem is that I'm not really developing my position. I'm not really developing the strength and stability that I need for the long run, right? So that starts to become a short-term game that I'm feeling, well, really good now, but what about 5 or 10 years down the road? So those are some real challenges that hypermobile people run into, is finding that inherent stability in their form.
And we were saying as well that it's like really important, as this is a long-term project, hopefully, that you're doing. And it does matter what's happening to your body, because in later life, if you've worked too much on stretching everything out and haven't got the strength to stabilize and control yourself, how is that going to play out as you get a little bit older? And so is there something that we can be always thinking about in the practice, rather than, there is that sort of linear progression in many of the, particularly in Ashtanga, but it's not always that we should necessarily be going for the heights straight away, or how should we be approaching what it is that we're trying to achieve, and from the physical point of view?
Yeah, no, I think we all go through that cycle of wanting to achieve. Many of us, particularly drawn to Ashtanga, do tend to be more of a type A, achievement-oriented personality. And I've certainly been through that as well. You get in these environments and you want to progress. It's kind of like earning a new belt, right? I want to get my black belt of 3rd series. So I do get that. For students who've reached that point that, okay, I've done 1st, 2nd, 3rd series, what else is there? They start to arrive at a plateau. They're not making huge gains anymore in their practice, but they're kind of where they are. Those are teachers. Usually those teachers start to dial back on base principles. I want to get my plank position really right. I want to really be focused on my feet during different asanas, the weight distribution of my feet, how my breath flows. So these basic principles, I think it's up to teachers to make those things really sexy. So students want to hammer on that. And to give context, students are always willing to buy in if you give them context. If you say to someone, hey, that stable shoulder is going to improve your handstand, right? Then they're starting to think, oh yeah, maybe you're right. So once the individual student buys into that, then they also become really interested in developing more of their base principles. And to me, that's not only the long-range yoga plan, but that's also the quickest way to success.
Is to move from stability.
Always. And you see this throughout sports. Athletes who achieve and especially are able to stick with something for a long time, it's because they understand that basic thing. When I was a young yoga teacher starting out, I had many stiff students, and I thought that, yoga is about getting more flexible. So I need to do everything I can to get these stiff students flexible. And then I moved over to Asia and I began seeing a lot of really hypermobile students. And I saw, wow, these students need to really stiffen up. They need to tighten everything together again. At a point, I recognized, though, that it wasn't about flexibility and it wasn't even about stability. There was actually something else that tied it all together. And I'm not sure what to call this. I think, we could call it proprioception. It's the ability to sense yourself in space. You might call it athleticism or just body awareness. But it's that skill set around understanding position and then spatial awareness as we move through the environment. And that includes everything. If you get really good at yoga, that should translate into dance or CrossFit or Pilates.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be really good at yoga and then you can't go do anything else. If you're good at yoga, you should be able to run up a mountain. You should be able to pick your husband up over your head. You should be able to do these things, and your yoga actually should be training you to do these things.
Often that's not the case, though, is it? Because a lot of the time we see, I remember, for one thing, I used to do body work on the third floor of a building, and people used to have to come up the stairs, and they'd be like, God, could you not put your place on the bottom? And I'm thinking, like, you've just done 2 hours of yoga. Why are you complaining about the stairs? Or people that have been practicing for a long time, but still struggle with slowing down a chaturanga or holding themselves in a stable position. So the pure attending and going through the motions of whatever you visualize as your yoga practice to do doesn't always result in a completely fully encompassed, from a health and fitness point of view, body, or even mind for that point of view. So what are the elements that yoga is challenged to give us, and how can we sort of focus on those in the yoga to make sure we suck out as much as we can from that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to begin with just understanding that bigger paradigm of your sort of movement, health, and fitness. I think that a lot of people would criticize yoga and anatomy and say, look, yoga is not physical, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm sure you've heard some of these
of
criticisms
course,
before. Ultimately, yoga is a meditative ideal, but clearly we are engaging with the physical body. So look, you and I think we can agree all day that anatomy is very important, and understanding the physical is very important in what we do. I think sometimes people really love the practice because of the simplicity. I know for me, I flew in yesterday, I was very jet lagged. My practice was so easy this morning. I got up, I knew exactly what to do. I knew how it began, I knew what the middle part was, and I knew what the end was. So I could almost, even though I was very jet lagged and tired, I could almost go through an autopilot, and just get through my practice. I knew the check marks and I was finished. The problem is doing that as an everyday practice becomes a form of laziness. Even if I'm engaged for 2 hours of hardcore yoga, I'm not really challenging myself to be very sharp, and I'm not really wrestling with the topic anymore. I'm not feeling things anymore. It's just automatic. I'm just going through the practice, and now I'm done, and I go to my next thing. And that's not at all what yoga is asking. Yoga is always inviting us back into that place of present awareness, right? It's truly a moving meditation. So I think for us as teachers to give our students some ideas around that, hey, ultimately in this yoga, you want to make yourself better. And if we can create ways that we're searching for very small things, just small sensation, just the sensation of a sun salutation, if we can create a certain glamour around that, then it becomes easier for the students to buy in. I know for me as a teacher, I'm constantly creating variety in my practice, even though from the outside point of view, it may look very much the same. Oh, he's just doing Ashtanga again. You know, it's just the primary series again. Another day, another dog pose. But the internal landscape is very rich. What I'm searching for in terms of my sensation is always a moving target, right?
So how can you vocalize that a little bit more clearly for people that are looking from the outside? There are probably going to be a lot of Ashtanga practitioners doing this, and they're thinking, okay, we're repeating the same postures every time. For those people that have been practicing a long time, you sense the richness of that and you become more sensitive to things. But can you give us a few clues as to the sorts of ways you approach the postures in different days that can add that variety? You
know, I was in a class recently with a new teacher, and she told me in the dog pose, she's told me to play around a little bit and see how it feels. And afterwards I told her, I don't play. I'm not in my dog pose and I'm not there to play. I might be moving around,
Yeah.
I might be shifting and adjusting and so forth, but I am not playing. This is serious business and I'm seriously engaged with it. So I'm kind of joking there.
Yeah.
The idea is not so much about playing around, but definitely taking time to explore the nuance of movement within the position. So I think coming in with that curiosity, but also having a game plan, understanding how things should feel. I'm not a big believer in teaching corrective exercises per se. You know, for example, if you damage your rotator cuff, you might go and learn some type of resistance work for strengthening your rotator cuff.
Yeah.
And I see that in physical therapy, oftentimes people fall off after the protocol of treatment is over. Well, I did my PT for 6 weeks, now my shoulder's better, so I'm going to stop doing the exercise.
Yeah.
Where my attitude is that we need to now embed that exercise within your yoga practice. Because I know that you're going to keep doing that. I know you're going to keep coming in and doing Ashtanga with me. So let's make sure that external rotation that you were working on with your PT, let's make sure you're doing that within your downward dog so that you're now creating all of those same corrective exercises within your practice. Students sometimes get this through injuries, right? I got hurt. My knee hurts. Now I have to really understand hip and foot function.
That's one of the first reasons people go back to the foundation of anatomy or the underpinning knowledge of movement is because they hurt themselves, isn't it?
That's
like,
right.
oh, okay, now I better think of what the hell I'm doing.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. So people will often have their eyes open through the injury. They either quit because they got hurt or they say, hey, I need to do it better. I need to find a better way. And I'm the same way. You know, I've gone through my share of injuries in which I've pushed and I've tried to achieve that next thing, and then I've realized, oh no, I've got to slow it back down. But if you were to look at like a Tai Chi master in the park, they're not all herky-jerky, they aren't forcing, they aren't turning red face and cursing because they can't acquire the posture. They're very calm, very smooth, and very meditative. So I think as long as we're fostering a culture of that as teachers in our classes, then the students will follow as well.
I get a lot of emails from people saying, you know, I've been doing yoga for a little while, I was really enjoying it, and now I've hurt my knee, or now I've hurt my shoulder, and it comes up with regularity. And we do view from one side that the yoga is a fantastic moving meditation. And so what are people doing wrong in the practice that is allowing this sort of thing to happen, allowing them to potentially stop them from practicing for several months or even put them off completely?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple of things that are important. One is that people are showing up not necessarily fit, right? If you were to look at there's a medical chart for this, like the wellness model,
right.
You know, and they're trying to get people back to like this sort of baseline of healthy. A lot of people showing up for the yoga class are not yet at that baseline of healthy, so they're already starting out compromised. So I went to yoga and my knee hurts, but it turns out I was running marathons for 20 years and my knee had come in with a lot of baggage already.
Yeah.
So I then did the yoga and my knee hurts. So we see that a lot. And I think that teachers are not always good at giving very simple principles for students to follow, so they don't have that reference point. You know, the beauty of alignment is that people at least have a reference point of where they want to end up. Even though I do think that word can be a bit flawed in our community, it at least is pointing at something that's very important, which is, hey, this is the reference point of what you should be. This is your baseline, what you should be doing. Yeah. So I think that as yoga teachers, if we can not only formally teach position and movement in our yoga class, but also encourage our students outside of the yoga class that they're mindful of their positions. In the San Francisco Bay Area, for example, if you go into almost any office there, they have options for the employees that they're standing. They're not sitting at the desk. You know, we now know this, that sitting is the new smoking, right? Well, in fact, they figured out that sitting is probably worse than smoking. At least when people were smoking back in the day, like in Mad Men, at least they were taking a smoke break every 45 minutes,
Standing
right?
up to go outside.
Yeah, they'd go outside the building, they'd take a little walk, they'd have a smoke.
Yeah.
Well, people stopped smoking and they started just sitting, like powering right through. Instead of getting up every 45 minutes, I'm just going to power right through. Or I still want to get some type of dopamine fix, so I'm going to eat like a cookie or something, right? So we've we've exchanged one problem for another problem. But around the Bay Area, we are seeing more of this shift now to like standing workstations. And standing is not the answer. See, that's always the thing, is that standing is not the answer. Movement is the answer.
Yeah.
But standing becomes a great way to movement. So that's one of the conversations I have with my students, which is like, hey, your back's hurting. What's going on with your glutes? Are you squeezing your butt? You know, let me show you how to do that. So I have little fun games that I play where I'll have my students stand in the Captain Morgan pose.
Right.
You know, like the rum.
The rum
so
one, yeah.
the one foot up on the treasure chest,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And it becomes kind of a joke, but it's a great way for them to offload pressure. So instead of standing with an overextended position, they're standing solid on one foot, that glute's on, and then all of a sudden the low back pain's gone. It's also a power pose. If you look at that Amy Cuddy TED Talk and the power of position, standing in these empowered poses will not only make them feel better physically, but the individual is going to start to feel better on a mental level as well.
Oh, cool. That's
Yeah.
with or without rum, doesn't matter.
Hey, it's really up to the yogi. I personally don't
And the
drink,
workspace.
but I tell you what, I don't judge. I think everyone should live their best life.
They're doing. And we were talking again a little bit off camera beforehand about, you know, some of these more advanced postures are advanced, you know, and you almost athletic in their ability to do these things. And are we really, when we reach some of those postures, particularly if we have a very bendy body, am I in the position that I should be doing that sort of stuff? So what are those problems that we face when it comes to those very intricate postures as we move through the series? If we've moved through a little bit quick, shall we say, and haven't really learned that proprioception you were talking about, or being in our body, and then we're suddenly faced with the ability to go into these things that maybe we put our body a little bit, make it more vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, we're hoping that the teachers are always helping us to kind of hold back a little bit. And hopefully our teacher is also taking a good overview of our total life scenario, right? Yeah. It's one thing if you and I are going on a yoga retreat, if we're going to Goa and we're just going to be there, and for a month we're just going to really dedicate our time to that. So we're going to be taking lots of naps, we're going to be getting nice massages, we're going to be eating really healthy food, as opposed to maybe someone in their normal environment that has a job that's more than full-time, that has a family life, that maybe has some kind of commute put in that. So it can be very challenging to try to manage an advanced yoga practice while managing a life, right? So I think those are things to consider in terms of the teacher. Then just practically speaking, in terms of the student, it does seem that hypermobile people, while in the beginning have a big advantage because they can usually move through the practice, they start to run into disadvantages because those injuries that develop through being hypermobile are not always easily fixed. And if you get someone that has very long hamstrings but they don't have enough engagement there, it's hard to get them to really strengthen those muscles. And I'm not even sure that they can do it by doing yoga, right? They might need something outside of the yoga to find that right stability. And I don't think it has to always be there. One of the best ways to increase proprioception is to use a ball, right? You get the ball in your shoulder, you start rolling around. And not only will it improve the tissue health and the joint health, but we know that a person's going to start to sense their shoulder better. They're going to have a better just spatial awareness of that shoulder, so they can then apply that in the yoga practice. Similarly, for the hypermobile person, doing something like going to the gym and learning how to lift a heavy weight up starts to give them a lot of context for how to stabilize during the yoga practice, or how to recruit some of those muscles during the yoga practice that they might not otherwise. Teaching how to feel is not an easy thing. We try to do it through cueing. Yeah. You know, as a teacher, I'm constantly looking at the student's feet. Oh, I see your weight's way too back on your heels. Why are you lifting your toes up? Yeah. Where'd that come from, the yoga world? That's a whole other tangent. But, you know, looking at that distribution of weight through the feet, looking at that spinal position. Okay, that's incredible. You're doing that deep back bend, but I can see that your head is in a hinge position, that it doesn't match that global arch of your spine, that you have a really bendy back there, right? Your T12L1 or your T12L1 is super bendy, but your thoracic spine's completely stiff. Your shoulders are totally locked down. So I think as the teacher, I need to try to take a snapshot of the total person. I need to look at their lifestyle. I need to look at their movement practice, all of those things, then I need to assess that before I'm doling out new postures, right? If I have a student who's not really committed to improving simple things like their sun salutation, right? If they're getting distracted and going to the bathroom during practice, right? Things like that are good indicators that they're not quite ready for those next stages. Or even someone who's overzealous in their practice, right? They're showing up 2-3 times a day.
Right.
Occasionally we have to tell them to
Calm
slow
down.
down. Yeah. And even though we're excited for their progress and certainly happy that they're into it, we also understand that this is a lot like gardening, that it takes time for the flowers to bloom.
Yeah. And so one last thing, when we're thinking about, again, people ask me a lot of the time, you know, I really used to love running, or we used to love this, and my yoga teacher said basically don't do it because it's going to influence the yoga practice. What's your take on supplementing, or also having more variety in the movements that you do rather than just one form, like as in the yoga?
Yeah, the body craves variety, right? And
exactly.
We crave that adaptation response. We need some new stimulus. We need something to adapt. That's how we grow and evolve. So I'm a big believer in living your life. You know, we sometimes will do everything to serve the yoga practice, but actually the yoga practice should be part of what is serving the rest of our life. We're born to run. There's even that great book about that.
Yeah,
we as humans grew and evolved to run. Someone who runs well is never going to get injured. Someone who does yoga well is never going to get injured. These injuries and things like that show up are because people are not doing it correctly, right? I mean, yoga is perfect. Ashtanga yoga is perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. Individuals, however, including me, are imperfect, and we come in with our baggage, we come in with our poor mechanics, and then we start breaking down. And that's normal. You know, usually we need some of those instances in order to grow and so forth, but it's fine. My sport is Ashtanga. That's what I love. I don't think I could get out if I tried.
Yeah.
And having said that, I do a lot of other things to support that. I've taken the Pilates teacher training.
Yeah.
I've trained CrossFit for a few years now. I continue to do those things. I like to run. I like to ride my bike. I like to snowboard. I like to skate. I like to do everything. I like to spend time with my kids. I like to go climb in the playground with them. I like to play with them. I like to show off and do splits and handstands for them. So I like to do everything. And the yoga, to this point, has actually enhanced everything that I do. I've not had to change anything or neglect anything. To me, that's a unnecessary step to take. And I think sometimes people will over-obsess about their yoga practice in a way that's just not really natural. So I think that the happiest yogis are the ones who live their life, and then the yoga is a wonderful bonus in their life. They're grateful they get to do it. They enjoy doing it. It's never a burden. They don't feel guilty if they don't do it. Come on. So I think that the people who have the healthiest attitudes are the ones who enjoy their yoga and really use that yoga practice to enhance the rest of their life.
Cool. That's a brilliant way to finish. Thanks very much, Adarsh, and take care, man.
Thank you, Stu.
Thanks.